Hi guys, my name is Kara. Welcome back. Today I am going to be doing my October wrap-up. So the first book I picked up in October was The Burning Sky by Sherry Thomas, and this is the first book in the Elemental trilogy. So in this book, our main character Iolantha finds out that she is the greatest elemental mage of her generation, with the power to defeat the person who is basically the evil dictator of their world. Our other main character, Titus, is a prince who has been training himself his whole life in order to protect this elemental mage. This book takes place partially in England and partially in a fantasy world. Basically, I just didn't find the plot anything special. There was also a classic girl has to dress up as a boy at a boys' school kind of thing, and I think that element took up way too much of the story. I also really didn't like the main romantic relationship between, of course, Iolantha and Titus, because it sort of feels like the book started out with insta-love and then tried to backtrack and make it like a slow burn. I did really enjoy a couple of the side characters though, and I think that the historical elements and kind of how that works together with the elemental magic aspects, I think that part was interesting enough that I think I will continue with the series, and I gave this 3 stars. Next, I finished A Long, Long Sleep by Anna Sheehan. And this is a futuristic reimagining of the Sleeping Beauty story. So I'm not going to say too much about this one because I actually have a full non-spoiler review on it. But basically, I really enjoyed it. I loved the character growth we got from our protagonist, Rose. I really enjoyed a lot of the other characters. I thought it was a brilliant exploration of kind of the psychological elements that would go along with this science fiction world and how that connected to the Sleeping Beauty story. It was a really good retelling, and I'm glad I gave it a chance, and I gave this one 4 stars. Next, I picked up Rebel Queen by Michelle Moran. This is a historical fiction novel that tells the story of Rani Lakshmi, who was the last queen of India. And it is told through the perspective of her close confidant and guard, Sita. So there were a lot of aspects that I really enjoyed in this one. I loved the cultural pieces that we got to learn about India in this time period. I absolutely adored the emphasis that was placed on female friendships and like relationships with other women, particularly as that relates to the practice of purdah, which is the separation of women from men. And I also just really enjoyed learning about a time period and historical figure who I knew almost nothing about. I had never heard of Rani Lakshmi before reading this book, and now I'm kind of inspired to find out more about her because she sounds like a fascinating person. That being said, there were a couple of big things that sort of kept me from rating this book more highly, and one of them was Sita as our narrator. Now, she was fine as a character, I enjoyed her even, but I don't think she was as interesting a perspective as the queen herself would have been. And this sort of goes along with that, but I feel like it took us way too long to actually get to the palace so that Sita could meet the Rani. And I understand that all of that background we got was really important to understand Sita as a character, but I still feel like it maybe slowed down the story and that we could have still had that emotional connection to Sita without spending such a huge chunk of the book before we get to the actual plot. And then my last main issue was the ending. I feel like it was really rushed, and it just seems like she sort of got to the part where she wanted to stop, and rather than wrapping up the plot, just kind of cut it off in the middle. And kind of going along with that, I have absolutely no idea how much of this book was historical or not. I did some very preliminary research, and I couldn't really tell if Sita was even based on a real character, or a real person I mean, or if she was kind of a combination of the guards of Rani Lakshmi, and it just wasn't very clear. And even in her acknowledgements where she talks about researching for this story, I didn't feel like Michelle Moran was clear about what she had embellished and added. I gave this book 3 stars, and I'm really glad I read it, and I hope to read more about Rani Lakshmi in the future. The next book I picked up was Traveler by L.E. Delano. In this book, our main character, Jessa St. Clair, finds out that she can actually travel to alternate universes and sort of trade places with these alternate versions of herself. And she discovers this when another character, Finn, shows up and tells her that all of the versions of her are dying across all of the universes, and that he's going to make sure that this one lives. So, this book. It had a really cool concept, and I really wanted to enjoy it, but I just didn't. There were very few things I liked about this. There is a character in this book who is on the autism spectrum, so that representation was really great to see. And then again, I did enjoy the concept, and some of the bits and pieces we get where they actually do travel to alternate dimensions, some of those were actually, I think, pretty well done. Those sections of the book were more enjoyable for me. And I actually feel like the glimpses we get of the otherworld Jessa characters, any one of them I think would have been a more interesting main character to follow than this Jessa. Because she was just, I don't know, she was completely uninteresting to me. Like, we really don't get to know her well at all, or any of the other characters really. I feel like they were all really flat. I feel like her and Finn had a really, really bad case of insta-love or insta-attraction or whatever. I thought that the plot was really nothing special. There was almost nothing about it that actually surprised me. Also, I just want to give a warning about the synopsis, because it says that her favorite character, Finn, suddenly shows up and invites her out for coffee. And that was one of the things that really made me want to pick this book up, is because I love the idea of fictional characters coming to life and sort of becoming people you can interact with. And that is not what happens. Finn is not a fictional character, he's just from another universe, which again could be an interesting concept, but I feel like the synopsis sort of made it sound like a completely different story. There's apparently a sequel coming out next year, which I do not plan on reading, and I gave this one 2 stars. Next, I finished Lost Voices by Sarah Porter, and this is the first in a trilogy of the same name. So in this world, when girls experience extreme abuse and hardship, there is the chance that they will actually turn into mermaids. So that's sort of where they come from in this mythology. And that's what happens to our main character, Luce. She experiences a horrible, traumatizing event, and she turns into a mermaid or a siren. And the rest of the book is sort of following her as she becomes part of a mermaid tribe and gets to know other mermaids like herself. I really did enjoy the writing. It was really in a beautiful style, and especially the parts where they were discussing the different qualities of the mermaids' voices and sort of the different powers. Like, there's some passages in particular that were just gorgeously written and really evocative. My favorite part of this book was actually the middle, because that's when a bunch of other characters show up, and I think when they start interacting with the protagonist, and that's when the plot really takes off. So it was going really well for a while in the middle, and then this other character shows up named Anais, and pretty much from that point on I was just not feeling this book anymore. And the only other thing I really want to say about this is that it is a very dark mermaid book, which I am okay with reading sometimes, but trigger warnings for abuse and rape, and yeah, this book was really strange. Next, I picked up Hex Hall by Rachel Hawkins, and this is the first book in the Hex Hall trilogy. So in this book, our main character, Sophie Mercer, is a witch who is sent to what is essentially a reform school for witches and shapeshifters and fairies who kind of get out of hand with their powers. And everything is going pretty smoothly until students at the school start being attacked, and the only suspect is Sophie's only friend. So she has to try and prove that her friend is innocent. This one was really fun. Sophie is a really funny main character. This is another one where the plot didn't really surprise me, but in this case I didn't mind it because I found that the character interactions and like the dialogue was really what I enjoyed. I had a fun time reading it. I gave it 3.5 stars, and I'm looking forward to reading the next one. After that, I picked up In a Perfect World by Trish Doller. So this is a contemporary, and we follow Caroline as she moves to Egypt so that her mother can open an eye clinic for her job. And throughout the book, we follow Caroline as she adjusts and comes to appreciate the culture of the new place she's living in, which is Cairo. And along the way, she starts to fall for an Egyptian boy, which complicates matters. So the things I really enjoyed about this book were, first off, I absolutely loved all that we got to see of Cairo. I thought that was really well done. It felt like really immersive, and I just really enjoyed getting to know the city. I also feel like Caroline had a pretty believable adjustment period. Like the experience of culture shock, I think, was done pretty convincingly. So I also thought the romance was really cute, and the other characters in general I just thought were really enjoyable and added a lot to the story. There were, however, a few problems I had with this book. I guess I just wish that more of the book had focused on her relationships with people besides the love interest, because when we did get that, I really enjoyed it. So another aspect that was kind of problematic or that bothered me was that Caroline was not consistently called out for her prejudices or her feelings about Egypt. Most of the time she was, and actually a lot of the time Caroline herself realized that what she was thinking was offensive or insulting or just, you know, wrong. So a lot of times she did notice, or sometimes other characters would call her out on it, so that was good. But it didn't, like I said, it didn't happen consistently, and there was one part in particular, early on in the book, she notices some women, I think, who are wearing hijabs, and Caroline has this thought that, like, oh, it's so cruel that they're forced to cover up like this, and like, it was really creepy or scary to see these women, like, they looked frightening, wearing this clothing. And I kind of expected that to be addressed again later, especially because we have a great opportunity with one of her, with another character named Aya, who has made the decision to wear the hijab. So I thought that would have been such a great opportunity for Caroline to sort of realize that that issue is not black and white, and that didn't really happen. And then I also didn't love the ending of this book. I feel like it sort of didn't fit with the rest of the story. It sort of felt out of place or rushed, and I gave it 3.5 stars. Next, I picked up Obsidian Mirror by Catherine Fisher, and this is the first book in the Chronoptica series. So this is a really strange and confusing book, and basically there are three main plot lines. One of them is a classic fae or changeling story. One of them follows a character named Jake who is trying to find out the truth about what happened to his disappeared father. And then one of them involves time travel and a strange girl named Sarah. So these plots are sort of mixed throughout the book, and sometimes that can be a good thing. But I think in this case it actually worked against this book in a lot of ways, because if you're not really interested in all of those sort of interweaving plot lines, there's gonna be big chunks of this book that you just don't enjoy. And for me, that did actually happen. There was one plot line with this character named Janus, and I just did not care. I just did not enjoy that part. I was far more interested in the other characters and their journeys. I also really didn't like the journal entries and flashbacks that we get, because there's quite a few of them, but overall I actually did enjoy this book, and that's for a few reasons. One of them is I really enjoyed that changeling aspect of the story. Like, Summer is, I guess, the fairy queen, and I loved how old school these fairies were, you know, how strange and eerie and kind of ruthless. You know, I really enjoyed that sort of old fairy tale aspect. That was actually one of my favorite parts of this book. And then another of the main characters, Jake, I really liked him as well. And again, he was also sort of a ruthless character, but I found that a little bit refreshing, and I gave this one 3.5 stars, and I will be continuing the series. The next book I picked up was Let the Sky Fall by Shannon Messenger, and this is the first book in a trilogy. Audra is a sylph, or a wind spirit, and she has dedicated her entire life to protecting and training our other main character, Vane, because he is sort of the only person who can defeat the villain who is running their world. I really enjoyed the world building and the mythology of the winds and the wind creatures and sort of how those work together. I thought that was really well done and interesting. Okay, so there were a lot more things that I didn't like about this book. This one actually made me really mad. Right from the beginning, Vane and Audra had way too much angst. Like, this wasn't even insta-love. This was maybe insta-lust, and they never stopped talking about it. Like, that's, I think, 80% of this book is them just angsting about why they can't be together. And speaking of Vane, he drove me crazy. And he's half the book because he narrates half the chapters, so that was a huge detractor for this book for me. He's just so casually sexist, and he has no idea that he is, and I actually marked a page because this is pretty representative of Vane's narration throughout the book. My mind wanders back to her skimpy dress, remembering the way it clung in all the right places. It should be a crime to cover a body like hers with that thick, bulky uniform she had on today. In fact, my first act as ruler will be to institute a new wardrobe for the Guardians and make Audra's dress even tinier. That might be worth the life-changing responsibility. So, yeah. I did not like Maine. And I'm still really upset about it. The next book I picked up was Princess of Thorns by Stacey J. I say first off that this is not a Sleeping Beauty retelling like the synopsis says it is. It's actually about Sleeping Beauty's daughter, so if you go into it expecting a retelling, you probably would be disappointed. Actually following is Aurora, or Roar, who is the daughter of the character who we know as Sleeping Beauty. And Roar, who has been very blessed with all these abilities that give her hopefully a fighting chance at saving their world from this prophecy that basically foretells a kind of world apocalypse, basically. She has to disguise herself as her twin brother, and she joins forces with our other main character, Prince, in order to rescue her brother and save the world. And I really, really enjoyed this book. It's definitely another strange one, but I feel like it worked in this case. I really enjoyed Aurora as a main character. She's a total badass who knows her strengths, knows her weaknesses, and is willing to fight anyway. She does do a couple of things near the end that really frustrated me. Like, there's this whole trick from that I really liked her. This is sort of a reformed misogynist, I guess. He's really unlikable at the beginning of the book, but by the end, I feel like he does start to get better. You know, you actually do care what happens to him. And actually, my favorite part of this whole book is when Aurora, who at this point is still disguised as a boy, just completely rips into him about how he treats women. And it is glorious. It is the best thing in this book, and I really love that. So he doesn't get off scot-free. I really just loved the writing of this book. It's got a very sort of fairy tale feel throughout it without going over the top and like too flowery. And also I loved the unusual resolution of the conflict. I thought that was really cleverly done. And it was not a lot of explanation for why the world is the way it is. And personally that didn't bother me because it was enough to sort of know like things are and this is what we're going to do about it. That for some people, but for me it actually really worked. Bottom line of this review is that it's maybe not, this book is maybe not for everyone, but if any of these aspects sounded at all appealing to you, I would encourage you to take a chance on it because I thought it all was really well done and I loved this book. I gave it 4.5 stars. Finally, the last book I picked up in the month of October was The Goose Girl by Shannon Hale, and this is the first book in the Books of Bayern series. In the novel, we follow Princess Annie as she is sent to marry a foreign prince, but along the way disaster strikes and she is forced to take employment as a goose girl under an assumed identity. And I really, really enjoyed this book. Shannon Hale has such a distinctive way of writing. It's really lovely, but it's not over the top. It almost feels kind of smooth, like it's very easy to read, and I thought that Annie was a really good protagonist. Rewarding to see her recognize this inner strength that she's had all along, and just seeing her sort of come to terms with that and recognize that her limitations don't make her less of a person or less suited to being a ruler just was really enjoyable and like fulfilling. Annie, we also get some really, really great supporting characters. Like her friendship with Enna is just so wonderful, and it's so downsides I really had with this were one, that there was quite a bit of traveling, which made sense for the plot, but that could get a little bit repetitive in the first chunk of the book. And number two, I wish that we could have seen more of Annie's home kingdom, Kildenry, which maybe happens in later books, so I look forward to seeing if that's true. gave The Goose Girl 4 stars. I really enjoyed it, and I definitely plan on continuing this series. Probably see. Those are all the books I read in October. If you made it through that whole video, then you are amazing, and thank you. I read 11 books in October, and I had an average rating of 3.3 stars. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!